Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Badlands draft season. I am your host, Michael Megan. Tonight, I'm joined by a very special guest. We have our own insider from the Badlands crew, fresh back from Mobile. I know Will has been dropping those nuggets in the Discord, which you guys are not subscribed to the War Room. You got to get in there for Will's nuggets. Will, how are you, my man?
Will's Nuggets. Listen, you know, sometimes you just gotta. It's not, I just, I'm just in there to, I'm just a guy. I'm just a
Yeah,
guy, just a guy with information. That's
exactly.
what
Know a
sometimes.
few guys, let a few guys know. Nothing more, nothing less.
Yeah, nothing. We're just here to have a good time. We're just trying to help out.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're getting the final news about the Jets coaching staff. We've seen them starting to clear out some of the front office, which I know is music to a lot of people's ears. I said we got the word down today that they just brought in George Payton's nephew, Robbie Patton. We think he's going to be the co-director of personnel, who just, replacing the guy that they just fired. So I guess I'll just pick your brain on that. I mean, he's a younger guy, new blood into, the organization, which I think everyone's been clamoring for. I think people have said good things about him. For those thinking this was just like a guy who got a job with the Broncos because his uncle's the GM, he was actually on the Broncos, in their scouting staff before Peyton even got that job, funny enough. So what are your thoughts on that little pickup by our GM?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things there. It's important that Muji gets guys that are his guys, quote unquote, right? I think Glenn is not. Glenn and Muji are a partnership that they chose, and Glenn obviously chose, but their interactions are more through Sean Payton or through interview processes, knowing each other, word of mouth, etc. So it was important for Muji to come in and Glenn as well, and kind of some guys that maybe felt like the quote unquote trimming the fat. You never want to see people get fired, but at the same time, maybe parting of ways in some of the scouting side of things, on the cap side of things was a good thing, and then you know from a Patton perspective, like we're not talking general Patton here. That was we talked about. We should have just tweeted out the. We
Should
just
have,
tweeted
dude.
out
You
the
should
Patton.
should have dropped the nugget.
We dropped the Patton, the picture last night. Uh, Huge mistake by me. Never again. But no, look, I think I asked a couple people around. It's hard because again, he was an area scout the last 8. He went from a scouting intern to area scout the last 8 years. Very similar track to Muji in a lot of ways. I believe Muji 8 years in got promoted to a similar spot as I think he was the director of college scouting or director of player personnel for a year, and then was promoted obviously to AGM the last 3 years before getting this job. Patton on a similar track, and just asked a couple people that know him. You kind of get a lot of the same stuff, and it's nothing. Very sharp guy, good eye for talent. Obviously in the bloodline, Patton's a good GM. It's his uncle. He's a UCLA guy. Played at UCLA. Also was played at San Diego, I believe. Then became a scouting, a scouting assistant or scouting intern at UCLA. Worked his way up there. Then made his move to the Broncos. So very young guy. I think getting some fresh blood in there, and again, somebody that also shares some of those Sean Payton, George Patton values. Can you now mix what Denver's had success doing the last couple of years in terms of drafting, and that scouting side of things mixed with Glenn and what they were doing in Detroit. Both those teams have drafted better than most any other teams in the league over the last couple of years. So you'd feel good that while he's definitely not the most experienced name, and I think that's something that we'd like to see maybe one or two more names. Certainly going to need a cap guy. They fired their cap guy, so but a cap guy, maybe one more senior level executive type, whether it's a parallel to Muji, whether it's somebody that's kind of in that consultant role. It's you can do it a lot of different ways, but they kind of feel like they need that John Dorsey type to go now with, we talked about it is Muji and Patton, the Agnew Holmes kind of thing. And then if you're looking for a comp, and then you still need that Dorsey type to kind of be the really senior mind there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only maybe downside for Muji is he doesn't have really direct experience with, unfortunately, a recently fired GM. Like John Elway isn't going to come here. I'm sorry to say that man runs Denver. I don't think he's ever leaving. So, which is like the biggest GM that he's worked under that obviously isn't in the role anymore. I think the dream thing is like, can you convince Tom Telesco like to come here? Probably
Yeah,
not personally, but like that's the kind of the thing person like you're trying to like bring here, pick their brain and whatnot. But as for the staff, I think which is all but finalized, and they really need to hire like a running backs coach. Maybe we'll see a couple more assistants. The defense, I think what really sticks out on the defensive side of the ball, which is so much different than the Saleh era, is how many guys have coordinator experience. Like I said, obviously Aaron Glenn was defensive coordinator himself. Wilkes has been a DC for a while. They bring in a defensive line coach, was the Bears DC this past year. Chris Harris, not the defensive coordinator name, but was a pass game coordinator. It just seems that, that's Aaron Glenn's side of the ball. And while it's easy to say, like, of course, that's going to be stronger, they're going to have more guys rally around him. So is Salah, and his staff did not have this kind of experience, which, if it goes well, everyone's going to point to it being like, oh, that's the reason why. And if it doesn't, it's going to be like, well, who cares about it anyway? So it's hard to get super excited, but I really think that side of the ball is a welcome change. Like what you were doing was not working. And clearly
yeah.
this is at least a step in a different direction.
It's a mixture of when Glenn got hired, I tweeted something about, hey, how many former players are we going to see, and we've seen quite a few.
Mhm.
The combination of did your parent or uncle work in the NFL as a successful GM or coach, and mixture of did you play in the league, even if you're a practice squad guy, like have you been in an NFL training camp as a player? And I think there's something to that. It's not like, hey, you're not these guys aren't deserving of these roles. They hired an assistant D line coach, from North Jersey that's like, hey, played in the league for a long time and like, you know, FCS program and the whole thing, but like, hey, can you come in and like just a little bit of knowledge, right? And we saw it work with the Lions. So there was the Antoine Randall-Els and Mark Brunells and JT Barretts who didn't really have much experience. Or you go to, kind of some of the names of, Calvin Shepard and guys like that had like really started to pay their dues and, kind of come up under Glenn. So like, I think the special team staff, I feel really good about because I think we've
Mhm.
heard Mike Westhoff is going to be, talking to Mike and stuff. He's feeling much better and the whole thing. And he was obviously out in Denver, and they're the best special teams unit in the league. Like, no surprise. And New Orleans was, and the Jets always were. And Mike kind of taught Chris Banjo. Mike and Aaron Glenn taught Chris Banjo everything he kind of knows in his
Yeah.
NFL life. And so I'm excited there. Another young guy, energetic. You'd like to see maybe do they bring a Leon Washington back, who is maybe that other assistant. I know he was been around for the Sala era and when they were good, and then he left, this year and
Look
was
what happened.
terrible, right? So moving to defense, I agree with you. Look, I think I'd like to see one more meaningful addition to the defense, and maybe somebody that's a high ceiling, lower experience guy. Can they bring in? I'm not obviously this is a bad example because he's on TV and he won't, but like the Roman Pfeiffer, like that type of guy. It's like, hey, they didn't really cross paths. It's not a good like Nickel Roby Coleman. Like I don't know. He was
Hmm.
obviously something. Just I'm just using a random name that kind of popped in my head and like that was a good DB in 2017. But like that type of guy, that can they bring in somebody that's like, hey, really young, kind of what Glenn was in Detroit. Like, can he be an assistant DB's coach? And like in
You're
two
trying to find
years,
D'Amico.
yeah, I want to
Yeah,
find a
like it's
pipeline that
yeah.
like can Glenn kind of have because Steve Wilkes is going to be here for 5-6 years, maybe he is, but likely he's here
Hmm.
for 2 to 3 years until either the Jets are good enough, Glenn can take over the play calling, or they find their next guy that's going to be like, hey, he's 34 and he's the hot shot coordinator in 2 years. Like, you want to start to build that pipeline. I know we're getting ahead of ourselves in some senses, but that's what good
Sure.
staffs do. And then offensively, I'll just say this. I understand that there's questions on the offensive staff. There was always going to be questions. The Jets don't have a
Yeah.
solidified quarterback. The Jets don't have a top 3 pick. And it's a first time staff. Like, this is what happens, right? And like the Jets have they still got a guy that I thought was pretty well renowned around the league. Like, I feel like
I think
people
he would
wanted
have
to,
gotten an OC job if he didn't get this one. Like, I think
yeah.
that's the
I
type
guess
of swing people take
I
when you're
think
trying
what
to find an
happens
OC.
is that like Nick Haley, no one, unless you cover the league extensively or you talk to a lot of people, like not like that, but I knew who Nick Haley was, obviously, because of last year with New England. But like, even still, like Nick Caley is inexperienced. He's never called plays at all, like at any
Mhm.
level. He's not even like
Mhm.
a. It's you're hoping you get Liam Cohen with Nick Caley. That's what you're hoping, but we don't know. Like we've seen other guys that come over with no experience and they don't do well. So I think again, is Scott Turner a great coach? No. Is Scott Turner a
Mhm.
great OC? No, he's not. But he's experienced. He's had some flashes. He believes in motion and he wants to throw the football. And if he's your pass game coordinator, like he got Brock Bowers the ball, he's able to get Terry McLaurin and these guys the ball. Like I know it sounds easier said than done, but we've seen it doesn't always work that way. So overall, the offensive staff, again, there is some concern because O line, first time O line coach, quarterback coach who's only been a couple years, as a true quarterback coach. But like we're nitpicking at positional coaches as opposed to like I feel pretty excited about the coordinators on both sides of the ball, which I think transparently, I'm not sure the last time we felt that way. Maybe people felt that way in 21, but even then, like it
Yeah,
didn't.
like LaFleur had hype, and LaFleur is the type of like coach that you want the defensive coach to hire. Like unfortunately, when it comes to having a defensive coach or a non-play caller head coach, like even like Sirianni would be an example of this, where it's like you kind of have to keep taking swings at OC if you want to stay ahead. If you're not going to be your play calling head coach yourself, and like Engstrom was good enough to call plays at 30 years old for a Mountain West program over 13, 14 years ago. Like clearly the guy's not dumb. Like clearly he's only progressed to this level, and people will make the comments about Campbell not promoting him or Ben Johnson not taking him. I think Ben Johnson, like, yes, being his offensive coordinator would be cool, but like you're also doing what you've been doing. You're not calling plays. Ben's going to call plays, and then we'll see if Dan Campbell was right. He was right to pick Ben Johnson. He was wrong to pick Anthony Lynn. He's currently he's 1 for 2. So
Yeah,
when it comes to picking OCs,
yeah, no. Look, and I also just think the one other thing I'll say is like you look at maybe Dan Campbell's looking at, hey, with the staff we have, I'm going to have John Morton, who's like called plays, although not even, I don't even, he hasn't technically called plays more recently at all. I actually don't truly really feel great about the Lions staff anymore. They've gotten a lot of guys, purged, and this is what happens. And Dan Campbell's this would be the hardest thing he's had to do is we saw it in Philly. It was really difficult, like the year that
yeah,
2 years ago or last
sometimes
year.
you need a gap year to get that mistake out of your
Yeah,
system.
and we talked about it, Goff's contract and the whole thing. But say it's just, like, do I think that Glenn's staff is an A plus on paper? No, I think it's
Yeah,
probably B minus, B plus,
yeah,
depending on how optimistic you are. But in week 3, we could be like, wow, the Jets have a really awesome OC who in 2 years is going to be a head coach, and I feel really excited. Or are we going to
yeah.
go? All right, it's going to be a lot of growing pains year 1. Glenn should be calling the plays year 2. Like, I'm okay with those conversations as long as the head coach is right, because everything else we can kind of, you can kind of, you always can kind of find those next guys. It's getting year 1 under your belt, and Glenn not having to call plays to me is huge.
Yeah, I mean, well, just to wrap it up with this, it's the Jets coaching staff this year was an F minus. Like, let's straight up. I can't tell you how much of a noticeable improvement you'll see if you go from an F minus to a C plus. Like, like I really don't think people like now. I think you get it because you were there every weekend. You saw how bad it was firsthand. But just going from horribly bad to average is going to be noticeable and just going to be a step in the right direction that you hope they can build on. But reason I had you on tonight, I know you were down in Mobile, boots on the ground, scouting the Senior Bowl, as DA calls it, Mike McCagnon's favorite event, seeing all his 24-year-old, unathletic guys that he just couldn't wait to draft. But, got a new GM. I think one of the cooler parts about this draft season is like we really don't know what a Darren Mugi like player or Aaron Glenn like player really is, and it's really just trying to about figure that out. So, who caught your eye down in Mobile at the senior week? Whether someone who stacked a couple practices together, who got noticeably better as the week went on, or someone you just think like, why did he even come? He was too good to be here in the first place.
So you didn't have me on to talk about Jalen Walker for 45 minutes. Who is in there?
We'll save. I mean, he's going to be a combine warrior, so I feel like we'll get
Yeah,
him at the
well,
end.
he is an Aaron Glenn player to a T. That guy is, uh, wow, what a specimen. Everyone wanted me to talk about build, so that dude's build is insane. No, guys that kind of caught my eye. Look, do I think Shamar Stewart at 7 would be rich for me based on where the Jets are? Yeah, but I could be convinced because that dude looks like Jadeveon Clowney with Miles Garrett's build, and you're like, what is going on here? Why are your arms literally like? I'm talking like over 7 foot wingspan. He's all of 6'5" plus 285. He could probably play at 300 pounds and play inside if he wanted to. He could play drop down to 270 if he wanted to. He's going to run sub 4.5 is what I've heard, and that's like
Mhm.
a pretty. That's not a. Oh, I've heard that. Like that's a. People feel pretty confident he's going to run in Indy like 4.48, 4.49 at 285. We just like it's he's a guy that like yes, the sack production is a huge issue, and there's something that's not clicking, which is why I would be very concerned drafting him at
Yeah.
7. But there's also a situation where like it does click, the light comes fully on, and we're like, oh my god, this guy has 16
Yeah.
sacks through 10 weeks. Like there's such a variance, and he was awesome. I thought he had a pass rush plan down in Mobile. I was a little worried. Sometimes guys like that, you get a little worried of like, are you just always the best athlete and you don't really have a plan? He looked like he had a plan, or at least he came into the week with a plan. So he was really impressive from a guy that like I was just really excited to watch and see, and like meeting him, like extremely nice dude, which it always goes like it always is interesting to meet these guys. Like they don't have to treat like a job interview, and I felt like he did in a good way. Um, a couple other guys who really stood out. I've talked about Jack Besh a lot. I felt like obviously there's a lot going on this week and everything like that, but man, he really capitalized on like in one on ones and in 7-on-7 and Skelly 7-on-7, some of the team stuff. Like every quarterback was just peppering him with targets. Like usually in these games and these practices, like it's you get 3 or 4 shots, right? And it's like, hey, did you make the most of it? It was like I felt like each day he's getting like 6, 7 targets in a 20, in a 20 play stack, which is like you don't see that. And so like I thought this sounds like this is a crazy reason to get excited about somebody, but he had a play here. Jackson Dart got him killed. Dan
Top
Jackson,
potential top 10 pick Jackson Dart.
potential top 10 pick in Jackson Dart. Dan Jackson, obviously, anyone that doesn't watch the SEC, which more power to you, but you see a white safety, and you do the classic like, what is this like walk on coach's son doing out here? That dude is going to play 3 downs. He's Reed Blankenship to a T and like actually hits people. And he took Jack Besh's head off in a red zone Thursday practice of a All-Star game. Like that's who Dan Jackson is. That's why he's going to be awesome in the league. Perfect hit, shoulder, right to shoulder. Like Jack Besh got popped, right back up, scored 2 plays later. And I was like, dude, the Jets don't have enough of that. That's like
Hmm.
that, like, I don't cool, you're gonna hit me, I'm gonna go score on you. Like it wasn't like pouting, it wasn't like, dude, like, what are you doing? It's an all-star game. Didn't say a word, got right back up, right back in the huddle. There's no didn't even adjust the chin strap. Just was like, nope, I'm good. Like me, because I don't know about you, and like I'll talk about a couple other guys, but like to me, that's the like that mentality has just been missing with this team for far too
Yeah.
long.
This team doesn't have enough killers. I mean, we this point has been belabored by I think everyone who comes on this podcast, and it annoys us all. Like Deion Dawkins was right. This team was soft. This team, once he got punched in the mouth, they relented. Ja- anything you learn about Jack Beck off the field shows that that guy is a warrior in more ways than I could even imagine. And this watching him play at TCU, which I'm actually happy that he got all these plaudits because like even just watching him on the field, like oh yeah, that guy was one of the best receivers in the Big 12 this year. Like I don't think he's Puka Nakua. But I understand where people are trying to say from that play style, and what I love most about watching about Puka is
Caveman
that guy is
football.
not afraid. That guy is not afraid. He will like it's crazy to say in the world of concussions, but like there are certain players who play like they're okay dying on the field, and both those guys fit that mold.
Yeah, no, it's the caveman mentality. Me and Connor are saying all week. We're like, that dude is literally made to play football in 1980, and like 1980s football is coming back a lot of ways. We complain about a lot of different things, but the teams that are really successful right now have no issue running the football, punching you in the mouth. They block you. They want to hit you. They want to hit your quarterback. They want to hit your receivers. They're going to hit you. They're going to talk trash to you. There's going to be, those the like the age of like the bully is coming back because so few teams do it that it's the same thing in baseball. Like if you can run the bases really well and play good defense in baseball, like you're going to be in the playoffs every year, and like no one cares
Yeah,
about it, and I get frustrated with it too. It's like, oh my god, Josh Donaldson again at third base, but like
yeah.
he's a bad example. But like my point being, like when no one else is doing something well and there's a formula that works, you got to get with the times, and the Jets have a shot here to kind of clear the deck and get with the times, and he's a guy that fits that mold. There's a couple other guys. Gray's able out of North Dakota State. I don't know if he can play tackle in the league from like a size perspective. Just the measurables and the arm length and stuff might not fit your typical tackle. But if he's there at 42, which I'm not sure he's going to be there anymore, and you tell me he can learn for a year under Morgan Moses and or AVT kicks out long term and he's your right guard or whatever the case is. I don't know. That dude moves really well laterally and didn't lose a rep all week and just like looks like a killer. I didn't get to watch him before the Senior Bowl, so this was my first. I've gone back and watched him, and the tape is the same you saw at the Senior Bowl, and like, but these are he went from no disrespect to North Dakota State, they're a powerhouse, but I don't know. Reps against Shamar Stewart are very different than reps against like what I was like.
Montana State's edge.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like I just it's just the reality. Like, and
yeah.
he held his own really well. I'll just give a couple shots to three more guys, and we can kind of move on. But I've said Jackson Hall's name like 800 times. He's going to go in round 6 or 7. Like he just is. He's going to catch 10 balls a year in the NFL. Um, I mentioned this on. I think I mentioned this on my pod, but I had somebody in the scouting community that said he's the best run blocker in the class. Period. Like offensive line, tight end, fullback, whatever it is. Um, that dude playing the role of what we thought Jeremy Ruckert was going to be this year means like it's a lot more palatable him as a tight end 3. If you brought back a Conklin and you took Mason Taylor in round 3, you're like, oh, now this room like is pretty exciting and cheap and cool. Mason Taylor's my long term starter. Jackson Hall's my long term 2. This year he's a run blocking specialist. You let Conklin just like run the seam and run corner routes, and that's it. And wow, like this room actually is kind of fun now. It's kind of frisky. Like that's the type of guy. Last guy I'll mention. Da mocked him to the Jets today in his mock. Trevor Etienne really had a really good week, and like I was really disappointed all year. I got to be honest, with me, because I was just like,
I hated watching Georgia's offense
I
so
just was like,
much because
what is this shit? Like what am I watching? Like
their offensive line couldn't run block. Beck was bad. None of their receivers are all
Etienne was
gadget guys
hurt.
who
It
can't
just
catch. Oscar Delp's good, but that's literally the
yeah.
only person I
It's like
enjoyed
even
watching
Oscar
on that
Delp,
offense.
everyone's like, ooh, like he might go in the first round, and then it's like this guy couldn't even
No.
come out because he wasn't going to go
Yeah, you
anywhere
catch some
near that.
passes.
So no, Etienne just had a really good week, and not for the reasons of like, oh, like he just was really good in pass reps, and then pass pro. I was like, worst case, this guy can play in the NFL on third downs because he can catch the football, and he sticks his nose in there. So a bunch of different names. Try to give a couple different names than I gave last week, but Etienne was definitely one of those guys where I was like, uh, Daniel Jeremiah still thinks he's going around 3. So
Maybe.
maybe that's
It's a good class. That's more my hesitation. I think, unfortunately, his name does him a disservice because when you hear
yeah.
ETN, you just don't see the burst, which his brother has,
No,
which is
yeah,
what made him so
exactly. And
special
I
at
think
Clemson.
he's
And
so good in pass
yeah,
pro that like again, the
yeah,
Jets Isaiah Davis is kind of probably that role, but if he's like lingering on the board like in day 3, like sure,
yeah,
I don't care. Take shots on
yeah.
running backs every year.
Yeah, like Douglas took a running back every year. We'll see if that continues. I don't think it's a bad strategy. Going back to your point about the North Dakota State, I feel like you should just take one FCS lineman a year. It just seems like there's always one or two of them that just outplay their draft stock or go to the Senior Bowls. Like I don't know, he was playing on he was playing on like the Ohio State of the Georgia of the FCS. Like what CV runs into like a real like edge rusher, and you're like, oh well, he has perfect technique and he knows exactly what to do, and you're like, maybe we should take this player. And you see like what Quinn Miners has blossomed to with the Broncos that Muji was a part of that draft, was part of that staff where he was basically just one of his first in the director role that hopefully he does see those inefficiencies that still seem to be there. But
I want to give
we were
one
talking
shout
about
out. I want to give one shout out, and I don't know if you've watched them yet. Have you watched Willie Lampkin out of North Carolina yet?
not yet. No, I've
He
tried
is
not to watch Mac Brown's
yeah.
Brown's teams have
So
been too depressing besides
Willie Lampkin,
Hampton.
Willie Lampkin's likely Patrick Ricard in the NFL. He's 5'11", 290, okay, as a center.
That's a fire
He's,
hydrant.
but he's got 32-inch arms at 5'11", which is like really good. You're like, wow, like he's actually got like everything other than his height makes sense. He pancaked someone in one-on-ones. I don't remember who it was, so I don't want to like. He AI stepped over him after doing it, and I was like, dude, get me this guy on my team immediately. I have no idea where he's going to go in the draft because again, he's all dog and like, but he's a center and probably play guard or becomes like a fullback, like six lineman type of guy. Uh, one of him or Jackson Hawes needs to fix the Jets run game. And like, I
Yeah.
refuse to have like one of them needs to be on the Jets, if not both. I want to see like a jumbo set next year of Braylon Allen, Brees, Willie Lampkin, and Jackson Hawes with this offensive line.
Dude, put those on the field and run that little skinny like FB dive with Braylon Allen that they literally felt like they ran once and then just refused to run again, and it just seems like it can get you 4 yards every time.
Again,
But no, your Jackson House
yep,
points is a really good one. Like if you could get someone to be like Nick Boyle was on the Ravens, like that's kind of a
yep.
very useful piece for a team who wants to run the football. Like
It's
that's
just
completely
yeah,
worth a
build
draft
out
pick.
the bottom and middle of this roster. Like this is the draft class to do it.
Yeah. I said we know who our coaching staff is. We think we have an idea. I know everyone's gonna be like, what Wilkes's defenses have been a little different. Like his defense in Carolina wasn't exactly how it was in San Francisco. How in Arizona he was only really there for 1 year as the head coach. Like it was really hard to get a gasper, and that roster was incredibly bad and had Josh Rosen playing quarterback, which didn't really help any defense. So I guess what players, whether it's the Senior Bowl or other guys that you think is going to be a good schematic fit? Like I was looking at the receivers, and I know a lot of people want to get size next to Garrett, but when you look at the Lions, like the two guys they really built their offense around on the receivers are Jameson and Amon Ra, who neither of them I don't even think are 200 pounds.
No, no, they're not.
And like I know everyone wants to put Ted here, but like, do you think that that X that everyone has been clamoring for, assuming if Rodgers retires and Devontae comes back, is that something that maybe they try to just UDFA it or like more like garbage free agent like they did like the Lions did with Tim Patrick?
Yeah, my gut feeling is the roster, the way I would approach receiver if I'm not sure how I feel about Tet because like part of me thinks like that'd be a great pick at 7, and part of me is like it's I have
It's not a
reservations.
good value at 7, but in this draft, I kind of get it.
You
That's
know
where I'm
exactly
landing.
like last year's draft, like he's going in probably in the 20s,
Yeah.
the teens at least, maybe the teens 20s probably is harsh, but
Brian Thomas Jr. went 23. Don't beat yourself up.
yeah, okay, so fair, right? Like
Yeah.
I would say Garrett, this is pending Rodgers retiring, Garrett maybe taking two swings on like Josh Palmer and Demarcus Robinson. Demarcus Robinson had a really
Hmm.
nice year in LA, like stretch the field guy, and then Josh Palmer can do some of that, but probably is going to be more in like can kind of play inside outside, a guy that you feel as you always like you're always wanting a little bit more, but like has been productive in the league, kind of like Corey Davis light in a lot of senses, where like not a perfect player by any means, and but wasn't the fifth overall pick either, and won't get 14 million a year. But like if you had those two guys and like a version of either Jack Bash or Jaden Higgins out of Iowa State, who's like that bigger stretch the field guy, like 6'4". I think he's like 6'4", maybe 198 or 6'4", 212, but like really slender. Like he's very different build than Jack Bash. If that goes into your room and then Corley's your 5, okay, now it's like we have some guys to play outside. Robinson, obviously Garrett could play outside. You like to have him have flexibility. Now we're talking, and like I said, if your tight end room's Mason Taylor, Conklin, and Jackson, like now it's like okay, Brees gets a ton of targets, Garrett gets a ton of targets. We're gonna give we're gonna take Mason Taylor along, and like you know that's gonna be that. But then we're gonna have guys that stretch the field, and like whoever the quarterback is can take deep shots to Robinson 2 or 3 times a game on some play action. Like that's probably how I'm trying to build the receiver room. If I don't go receiver round 1. If they did Jets for whatever reason trade back, I still think Emeka Ibuka is like a guy that like you seriously have
Yeah.
to go, okay, like just don't draft Kyle McCord if you do that because Emeka
Yeah.
will
Like
immediately go full Garrett Wilson and demand a trade. But yeah, there's ways to do it. I just think getting some varying skill sets in here and guys that can allow Garrett to be moved. Like, okay, one rep, Josh Palmer's outside, Garrett's inside, and then next they could flip it where like you don't want to pigeonhole guys. I feel like in these modern day offenses.
No, I definitely agree. On the defensive side of the ball, I guess my big question, and we'll see, I think he's a guy who's gonna have a lot of varying opinions. But do you really think that we think Glenn's gonna have a pretty big say in the draft process, obviously with personnel control? Do you think he's gonna see like Will Johnson and be like, imagine just putting him and Sauce together? Like, that's the thing that I can't like pick, like in this for this regime for this draft, because like I think there's a couple good corners. I said Benjamin Marsden as the real injury thing. Travis Hunter, we don't think is going to get there, but like there's a lot of, and also VCU guy whose name escapes me. He's coming up to torn ACL, but he's awesome. But that's more the thing is like, are they going to just like DJ Reed? You can go, but we're going to take like a corner that early, and we're just going to have like the old school Saints like 2018 secondary.
Yeah, I think it's a real possibility. I think my issue with Will Johnson is I had some questions around the Ohio State game. I thought I'd found out that my concerns were not valid, which I'm happy about. Like that he was, this was always the plan. Like he toyed torn ligaments in the foot and the whole thing, and like it's not. This was not like, oh, it's Ohio State, I'm not playing. Like it was like, dude, I've basically ruined my draft stock the last 6 weeks because I'm playing on turf toe essentially. Um, but I also feel like he makes plays. He can play anything
He's a
underneath.
gambler.
He's a
He's a
gambler. Anything
gambler.
underneath is like fair game to be a pick six. It's also fair game that he could get beat. He's kind of
Hmm.
the opposite of Sauce in a lot of ways. Like Sauce doesn't really ever gamble. He gambles like once
No,
a game max. Will Johnson will gamble like 2 or 3 times. He sees the game really well. It's going to depend on how he runs. Can he run in a similar time to what Sauce did, where it's like, hey, the long speed's not a concern. If the long speed's not a concern, it's a serious conversation at 7. Like it really is. And
he
I
might
don't.
not even get to 7 if he runs
Yeah, I
like
was going to say,
like a
look,
4.46.
Jets are. If Salah had gone to Jacksonville, he was he might as well have just made a Will Johnson Jags jersey. Um, the one name, and I talked about this with Renner. This will probably drop Thursday, so Wednesday. If AZ Thomas finds his way to 42, which I don't think he will, I think he'll go in round one. Or
Hmm.
if he's at there at like 36, 37, when you're kind of similar to what they did with Brees, where it's like, hey, we got to go up and get our guy. We'll give up the extra 4 or whatever we'll do. I'm not saying he's going to be a star in this league, but having two really long corners like that are 6'2 respectively, 190 plus pounds, and AZ Thomas is 20 years old, like I think corner is going to be more of a priority than people realize. Again, we could say that now, and then they sign Carlton Davis, and who gives a shit?
Sure.
So
And they just take their developmental day 3 pick, and you're like,
yeah,
hey,
which is
maybe
totally
like maybe in a
I'm
year.
totally game
Yeah,
for, but they're gonna need whoever it is has to play press man, and Will Johnson can play press man, and Sauce has to be able to play press man, which I think he can. Terry Arnold going last year was because that dude could play press man. Like he's gonna hold the shit out of you, but he
yeah,
plays press man and he's a competitor and he's a dude. So, um, and I think he'll get much better next year. I think it just rookie in the year in the NFL, it's hard, but
it's hard.
corner should like Will Johnson should be at least a consideration at 7. It's not my favorite pick,
Yeah.
but
I
there's
don't really
also
have one if it's not Graham or Carter, to be honest with you.
yeah, I'm of the mindset that like there's I don't Graham to me is the most confusing eval in this class of the guys the Jets could have, and I talked about that like his ability to be explosive is like first step's amazing, but like I just have like a slight risk, and I'm not saying that he's not a great player, and I wouldn't be happy if he got one at 7, but like getting like a tier 2.5 athlete at that type of position is a little scary. It's not saying he's not awesome. It's like a little scary of like, can I get a guy in round 2 who's 85% of the player and a better athlete and hope he pops, you know?
I think the question for Mason Graham, and this person has also had some health problems, so it's like, knowing what this draft class is, what we think it is like, he's probably Derek Brown. I like Derek Brown. I think Derek Brown's a good player. I never had the expectations for Derek Brown that I probably had for Quinnen or I had for other defensive tackles. Like I said, like Jeffrey and Dexter didn't have top 10 hype. They went, Dexter went I think at 17, Jeffrey Simmons was
Yeah.
in the 20s, and like they become better players. but like that's kind of the mold that you're saying. Like I love Mason Graham more for his fit than I believe in him in a
It's a
vacuum for the fact
huge
that
need.
like,
It's a huge need.
and it's also like there's not a player who complements Quinnen better.
Yeah.
Like everything that Mason Graham does well is just complements that basically frees up Quinnen to even like be worth it for the rest of his contract, and then also develop. Like Mason Graham's still a young player. Like Mason Graham got on the field at Michigan. Like that was the huge thing about the defensive line rotation is that like they just rotated those guys so much. Like
Yeah.
part of his production isn't that he wasn't producing; it's that like look at his snap counts.
Yeah, he's got. I
So
think
I
he's
do
got
think there's an extra
1
level
year.
there, but your athlete points are very valid.
That's why, like, I'm gonna keep saying the Jalen Walker thing, and I understand that there's a lot of reasons to be concerned about a guy that's like, hey, is he a linebacker? Is he an edge? I think he can play full time edge, and I feel very confident about that. I watched that dude, like, just there's reps where you're like, oh my god, like it's
Yeah.
just like, and I said this with Mike, but I got to watch Georgia Auburn this year in person, which is it's always nice to see these guys in person, especially some of the juniors. And you know, I'm going to that game thinking Michael Williams is the guy I want to see in person, and Michael did a lot of what he does and was banged up and semi-injured and was taking different series off. And Jalen Walker's just like killing people, just like absolutely murdering them. And again, it's like there's if you want to transform your defense of like, hey, this guy's just a sick athlete that might run into 12 sacks 1 year, but maybe he's an 8 sack a year guy. But like, I don't know. I think he could play middle linebacker in the NFL. I think he could play edge. I think he could be just a blitzing backer that's kind of plays the Devin White Bucks Super Bowl run role, but like isn't a terrible athlete. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there's
Or actually knows how to like, pedal
doesn't just
backwards.
ride horses and like get
Yeah.
called a top 5 player in the NFL by people that we all both respect. But my
Yeah,
only
that
the
was
reason I
that was
just
that was so crazy.
it's the craziest comment on TV history. My point being, like, if you think Aaron Glenn's a good enough coach to put him in a good spot, like, dude, the Lions took Jack Campbell in the first round in the top 20.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to people around the league that knew the Lions staff and whatever, like, dude, he's the best player we played all year. And I was like, okay, maybe I don't know if I agreed with that, but
I liked Jack Campbell. I wouldn't agree to that with
an
that draft.
insane statement. My point being that this is a team and it's a regime, and Aaron Glenn obviously talked about getting guys that fit his culture. Like, there's something appealing about on third down and second down on packages. Like, hey, I can leave Sauce and Michael Carter and take whoever the corner, Carlton Davis, on an island. They can play press man. We'll have the 2 safeties just help, and like I can throw some crazy blitz stuff at you with Jermaine and Will McDonald and Quinnen and Quincy and Jalen Walker just trying to kill people. And like, hey, Josh Allen, you're not outrunning Jalen Walker. You're just not.
Team speed's
Like,
very important.
yeah,
Like
like very, very important. That's the reason I'm so
very
high on
important.
him. And I just think I understand again the concern, but if you told me let's take a swing at 7 and it's not Abdul Carter or Mason Graham or Tet or something like that. And it's like, hey, we're going to take a swing on a defensive guy. Like, that's the defensive guy I'm taking a swing on all day. I don't know if he's going to be there, but
Yeah, I mean, I said for the combine, but for the early days, I know. I think what's the combine like a month away? Less at this
yeah,
point.
less than that. It's 20. I'm leaving 18 days. Oh, jeez, like 19
Yeah,
days.
so like I said, so we're basically less than 3 weeks away from the combine. Definitely going to be a huge riser coming from that. But if this draft is going to be the 2 quarterbacks, Abdul Graham and Will Johnson, like, and then I think they could be even fit one more pick in there. And Hunter, sorry, Travis Hunter's going to go. Like, if that's the 6 players that come off the board, I really don't love anyone. And obviously, the idea was like, dude, just trade back. I'm just like, someone's gonna want to come up, and if I don't like any of the players, good chance there's someone behind me who doesn't like the players either, who doesn't gonna want to forfeit draft capital just to make the selection. So I completely understand
If
where
you
you're
want to
coming
be
from.
trading back, you better hope Will Campbell's arms aren't as small as I think they are.
Yeah, because like Kelvin Banks isn't going in the top 10. Like,
Not sure he's a tackle.
yeah,
I don't know that
I
there's a single left tackle that's going in the first round. No, I don't know.
it all depends on what Josh Simmons' health is. If his knee's okay, he
And
should.
Membu, I guess.
He's gonna go to the Chiefs at like 32, and I'm just like, yeah, of course.
Of course. I got
Of
Membo
course.
too, I guess. Membo's such a 49er, it's not even It's like such a lock.
Yeah, that's such a John Lynch Kyle. Like, yeah, we're gonna pick at 12. We're gonna pick in the top 15 for the first time. You still can't believe, aren't gonna believe who we pick.
We just picked
That
Trent
that's
Williams replacement. Great.
yeah, that's just so on brand for them. But Will said, always good chopping it up with you. And I think said we give people some nice information. No, Senior Bowl's done. Combine is coming. Draft is right around the corner. I'm sure I'll be getting the bat signal any day from Connor about when we're going to start the guide and then have all that going. We had the live event coming April 11th. If you have not bought your tickets on TJ.com, Badlands.com, please, please buy them. It's going to be a great night. I know Will's going to be there. I don't, I don't think I've seen anyone drink more tequila than Will. So see if you can prove me wrong.
Yeah, people are chatting in Discord like, "Oh, dude," I'm like, "Buddy, don't do this."
Dude, I've seen Will in person, man. That's not a battle you're going to win.
You might like say you're keeping up, but I won't be hurting in the morning, and I bet you will.
Yep. So, like I said, guys, appreciate you guys tuning in, and we'll see you guys next week.